Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kevin Kwan Loucks, and I'm the CEO of Chamber Music America. Thank you. It's so wonderful to see so many friends here, artists and educators and arts leaders, supporters and members of the chamber music community gathered here in New York City. Thank you for spending part of your afternoon with us. And to everyone tuning in from across the country via our live stream today, thank you for being part of this exciting day. Before we begin, I'd like to extend special thanks to our partners and supporters whose belief in this work helps make gatherings like this possible. Deirdre and Scott from BMI. Could you stand up, Deirdre and Scott? Thank you. Craig from New York Community Trust. Craig, are you here? Craig, thank you. Please stand. And to Julie, and I'm not sure if Delaney's here, but Julie from the Wallace Foundation is. Well, thank you, Julie. We're so grateful for your partnership and your commitment to this field. You're helping power creativity, and we're very, very proud to call you friends and partners in this work. I also want to wish everyone a very happy National Chamber Music Month. More than a decade ago, CMA launched National Chamber Music Month as a way to celebrate the extraordinary creativity, intimacy, and human connection that define the small ensemble field. What began as an awareness campaign has grown into a nationwide celebration of artists and communities coming together through chamber music in all of its forms. And truly, I can think of no better way to celebrate that spirit than by gathering here in New York City. This afternoon's set of conversations are especially meaningful. At Chamber Music America, we spend a great deal of time thinking about artistic excellence, innovation, legacy, and the future of this field that we all care so deeply about. Rarely do all of those ideas come together in one person as completely as they do in Miss Thea Musgrave. For more than 7 decades, Thea has created music of extraordinary imagination, drama, intelligence, and emotional force. Her work has expanded what chamber music, opera, and orchestral music can be, always deeply personal, unmistakably her own, and driven by an extraordinary sense of curiosity and creative courage. What makes today especially meaningful is not only the opportunity to reflect on a remarkable artistic life, but also the chance to celebrate generosity, stewardship, and belief in the future. As many of you know, Chamber Music America recently announced the creation of the Thea Musgrave Performance Fund, made possible through a historic gift from Thea and her husband, Peter Mark. This fund will help support future performances of Thea's chamber music and ensure that new generations of artists continue engaging with this extraordinary body of work. That kind of investment sends a powerful message. It reminds us that music is not only something we inherit, it is something we actively carry forward together. And so today is not simply about looking back, it is about continuity, about imagination across generations, about what it means to devote a life to creation and to believe deeply enough in the future to help shape it personally. Thea, thank you not only for your extraordinary music, but for the imagination, courage, and generosity that continue to shape the field. We're so honored to celebrate with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. A great pleasure to be here, but I have to alert you that the one thing that I am becoming really, really, really good at is senior moments. Fortunately, my husband is here to keep me in order, and Kevin is beginning to know us quite well, so he will too. But I'll do my best.
You know, Thea, you've spent nearly a century surrounded by music, a century. When you sit here today and you think about a life in music, what kind of feelings come up for you?
I want to tell you, since you say that, nearly a century, I remember, in case some of you have kids or are teaching your kids piano, this could be interesting. I remember when I was 5 and went to my very first piano lesson in the little school that I was born in Edinburgh, and so it was in a little private school there, and I went, I think I was 5. So I went into the room, and there was Miss Baxter with bright red hair and a green dress, unforgettable, and was an upright piano. So she said, "Come on, darling, come and stand on the seat." Stand on the seat? Yes, come on, stand on the seat and face the wall. So I thought I was in trouble. You know, facing the wall is usually when you've done something bad at school and you have to be in the corner. So I reluctantly got up on the seat in front of this upright piano and faced the wall. She opened the lid and she started to play. So I saw the hammers going against the strings. And I tell you, that is what hooked me on for music. So if any of you are teaching a young kid aged 5, I recommend that. It's fascinating. You know, you don't expect to see the hammers working, and that's how the sounds are made. And, you know, so I give that to you if you ever are in touch with a 5-year-old.
You know, when you were young and you had that experience, was it the sounds that were being created, or was it the kind of the mechanics?
No, I was seeing the hammers go through and the sound coming out of the hammers. It was an upright piano. So you look, you know, you're standing on the seat and you're looking down the lid and you see the hammers going like this. You know, whatever she did was fascinating.
Was piano your first instrument?
Yeah.
Do you play any other instruments?
I played the viola very badly. That's about it. No, the piano was what I spent hours on and practicing and so on, you know, 2-3 hours every day.
You know, was there a
It's all
moment?
forgotten now.
Was there a moment in your early training with piano where you decided, I have to compose, I have to create? When did that happen?
No, that didn't happen right away. I mean, I did compose 1 or 2 things and everybody said, "Oh, that's nice," but nobody took any notice. And so I didn't either. But I knew that, actually, my very first thought was that I wasn't going to be a musician. Music was always going to be part of my life. But I was going to be a doctor, not a doctor that looked after people, but the doctor who discovered cures for everything. I was going to discover the cures for, you know, AIDS hadn't happened yet, but, you know, cancer, TB, you name it. I was going to do that. And I even did a whole quarter at Edinburgh University, which had a very good medical school, absolutely adjacent to the music school, strangely enough. And so there I was in the medical school, and I suddenly thought, you know, this doesn't seem to be taking me on where I want to go, and music is much more interesting. So I sort of deserted the medical school, and my steps went into the music school, and that's where I landed up for 3 years.
Lucky for us. You know, you studied with Nadia Boulanger.
Well, I had 3 years at Edinburgh University, and I got my muss back. And everybody here says, "Why on earth didn't you go for a doctorate?" Well, in Europe, one doesn't do that. I went instead for 4 years to Paris, and I studied with Nadia Boulanger for 4 years, and I didn't go after a degree. What on earth for? You know, as a composer. Different in this country. So this country, when I eventually, many years later, married him, and then got a job teaching at CUNY, they all said, why don't you have a doctorate? We nearly didn't hire because you don't have a doctorate. I said, well, you know, what on earth for? I studied 4 years with Boulanger. It's worth much more than a doctorate. So they were all very shocked. But somehow they let me in. I'm not quite sure how, but they did.
Can you tell us some of your favorite moments, memories, learnings from studying with Nadia Boulanger?
Well, I worked very hard for her, and one thing that was very interesting, which I remember to this day, and that was that one day I came in and I said, you know, I had a complete writer's block. I just couldn't write anything. You know, I haven't got anything to show you. She said, here's what you, and she knew I worked hard. I wasn't just, muffing it. She said, here's what you do for writer's block. So anybody who's a composer, listen, this is Nadia's advice to you. Okay, you go home, and every single day you write a short, very short, but a complete piece. But here's what's important. It doesn't matter how bad it is. And I realized what I was doing to myself was writing something and saying, oh, that's awful. Oh, that's terrible. How can that happen? Instead of saying, oh, it might be better if I did that rather than that. Or, oh, wait a minute, if I did this and not that, then it would lead you there, which is a much more creative way of going. So that was quite interesting. And then her advice, to write a piece every day, and it didn't matter how bad it was, but just the fact of writing and saying, if I did this, then that can happen, but maybe if I did that instead, then this could happen, and that could link with that. That's one thing. So I call that sort of one part of composing is the short term and how everything meshes at a single moment with everything else. But I had one major teacher who I never met. I don't even know that you would know his name in this country. His name was Donald Francis Tovey. Yeah. A fabulous, fabulous teacher who wrote wonderful books about the various orchestral works. That he was a conductor at Edinburgh University. I never met him. He died before I arrived. But his work and everything he ever wrote, I read, and I always have regarded him as one of my major teachers, though I never met him. But I feel that I knew him very well because I read absolutely everything he wrote. His descriptions of Beethoven's symphonies and how they worked, and what he calls the long-term harmonic journey. Not just going from here to here to here to here. Sure, you're doing that, but what is your long-term journey? Where are you going to? And how are you getting there? And will you wait for this here, or will you do it a little later, whatever? That you plan the long term fairly early on when you're starting out on your work. You have the idea of your long-term, not just harmonic journey, but also your dramatic journey, where you're going to end up, and how you're going to do it. Mind you, changes happen on the way, of course. You can change your mind, that's allowed.
Something I've been able to really appreciate as I've gotten to know you is your humor and your curiosity. And I was myself curious if you still kind of recognize the young composer inside yourself as you're composing even today, or has the trajectory changed?
Yeah, I'm always young. That's the great thing. You're old out, of course I'm old, but inside I'm young. You can do whatever you want, So listen, how many composers do we have here? Yeah, okay, remember that, you're young. Okay.
What excites you creatively today, when you're thinking about a project?
Having a new idea. When you are beginning a new work, it's always a sort of slightly daunting. What am I going to do? First of all, what are the instruments? Do I know that instrument? For instance, recently, a friend of mine introduced me to a young bassoon player who I met for all of 15 minutes. And she took out her bassoon and played a little bit, so I thought, she's really fabulous. But then she said something really quite amazing. She said, I like to play walking around. I said, you'll be sorry you told me that. So here's what I did. I thought about it quite quickly, about my journey. I thought, I'll have her enter. Okay, you're the orchestra, I'm the conductor, and this is where the soloist, there's the audience behind us. I said, I will have you enter upstage center, and everything is very dark and gloomy and sad. And they're all playing like that, and so she likes playing standing up, so I don't know if she'd be sitting for the first section or not. But the first violin, the concertmaster's right here, and he has a little motive which is sort of meant to be encouraging, the words of hope, or something like that. And she, from back up there, she hears that, and she pays attention. She thought, I've got to meet this person. And she looks at the orchestra, shall I go round the orchestra that way, or shall I go that way? Well, she likes to look at the trumpets more than the horns. They look more interesting. So she decides that she will move. As I said, she likes to play standing up. So she moves around and then plays a whole section with the trumpets, who get very excited about the idea how she can get round the orchestra to meet up with the concertmaster. And so she has a very fast section. And being Amy Harmon, listen to that name. She is extraordinary. She kept saying, that's not fast enough. 120, crotchet is, sorry, what do you call a crotchet here? I can't remember. A quarter note? No. Is 100? No. It's got to be 132 at least, maybe even 144. These are metronome marks. Got to be much faster. I really want to go there. And then, so she plays over there, stage left with the trumpets. And then she gets excited, and then she sort of has a good look at the concertmaster, and he points he's sitting there, so he sort of points round to the double basses. What would I be doing with the double basses, So he said, no, go down to the double basses, who are, stage left, right? And so she goes down to the double basses and has quite an interesting time, and I had quite an interesting time finding something interesting and high up for them to play. I had them play all in harmonics, so they were way higher than the bassoon. And then eventually she comes around stage front, and then of course she eventually meets her friend, the concertmaster, who gave her the little words of hope. So I thought that might be nice these days of COVID and all the rest, that we live with darkness, but it's always nice to have a little bit of hope somewhere. So this was a piece that I wrote for her, and I just found out a week or two ago, it's going to be done in the London proms. But because she's walking around, they're going to televise it. I never heard of a prom concert being televised. So thank you, Amy. She is extraordinary, and I think she'll do it with great dispatch and fun, and will meet up well with the concertmaster. So keep your fingers crossed for, I forget the date, I think it's
August 23rd.
August 23rd. I don't know, as it's being broadcast, whether you'll actually get to hear it, whether we get the BBC in this country. It'll be in New York, of course, 5 hours earlier? So, I don't know, whatever. But anyway, thank you, Amy, for doing that.
When you were composing this, it sounds like you were coordinating a lot of things, visually and also musically. I mean, what were you actually seeing during that process? Was it something that was very clear to you visually?
I was seeing how she would stand and how she would move, and make sure that, but also she had a motive to move, which was the concertmaster. And what also, I think, if somebody gives us a word of hope, that, we're likely to follow it rather than words of despair. So if somebody gives us a word of hope, try this, try that, and gives us a way to go, we're more likely to try and follow it.
My last visit to your apartment, you gave me a goodie bag full of amazing recordings of your music. And all of it felt adventurous and really fearless in a lot of ways. And I was curious, how do you think about risk? How comfortable are you when you're taking creative risks?
Well, it depends what they are. My first risk, in a way, is if you're working with a soloist, is getting to know the soloist and their instrument. Like recently, I wrote a trumpet concerto, and although I've written a lot for the trumpet, just in groups, in an orchestra and so on, I didn't really know it as a solo instrument any more than I knew the bassoon as a solo instrument. I really had to had to learn with the bassoon as I was writing it for Amy. I would send her pages that I'd written. You know, it's still extraordinary to me. You can write your music out, then you photograph it, and it can arrive in London, 1 minute later, and she can look at it and say, well, it's very awkward getting to the F sharp from, I forget exactly what she said, whether she get it from an E or from a G, but it's much easier for us the way the fingers work if you go it this way. So I picked her brains. If I get a good performer, you bet. And I always said to my students, get ready to pick their brains because they will teach you. And in fact, one person that tried to teach me was the oboe. And at that point, I forget which notes, but I think the low C sharp, just above middle C to D sharp, was very difficult to play without a lot of stops. So then, much later on, I said to this player, why the fuck didn't you tell me that that was difficult? Well, it isn't difficult anymore. The instrument has been rebuilt so that it's not difficult anymore. So not only do you have to deal with learning the instruments, but they can be changed. So you have to be in touch with your performer, and you have to be sure they're with an up-to-date instrument. But I always have fun when I've written a piece, either for an orchestra or in the chamber music or whatever, going to a rehearsal and watching them play. So if suddenly do this, you go to them and you say, what's that? Well, that's C sharp to D sharp. Anybody ought to know that. No way a composer, listen composers, no way you can know every instrument and how absolutely every note goes to what note and what note is difficult with another. I just learned yesterday, or was it last week, that on an oboe, from a low D flat to an E flat is very difficult because you have to put what he calls a special tone in to block it. You have to put 2 fingers down instead of 1. Well, who knew that? Well, now I do. So don't ever write a D flat to an E flat on an oboe at any speed. They can't do it. And he showed me why. Because I always said, if you can't do it, I want to know why, show me. Because I thought that was interesting. So you're warned. But then by the time you get to do it, they'll have changed it and it'll be easy again. So who knows?
Have you heard performances of your music that have revealed something that you didn't know was there?
Oh, sure. Oh, yes. I mean, I was working once with, it was after the piece, actually, but was maybe just before the piece, after rehearsal. I was working with a fabulous performer from Australia who lived in London, played with the LSO, horn player called Barry Tuckwell. How many people have heard of Barry Tuckwell? Well, look at you. I had the great pleasure of working with Barry. One of the things that he did for me, he wrote me with the fingering for the horn a quarter tone scale coming from C sharp, an octave above middle C, coming down. So we had 24 notes coming down with this incredible fingering. So once or twice I've used that, and players have said, what is this? I said, oh, those are Barry's fingerings. Oh. And it must be all right.
Can you recall attending a rehearsal or a performance that kind of changed the way you thought about composing and creating?
Well, just that if something didn't work, why didn't it work? And sometimes it was very simple. I did something where I had the tuba, I think, had a big solo to play. And then it came to an end, and he just sort of sat down, and he put the stand down to a height that he could see sitting, and sort of took no notice. So I went to him in the break, and I said, you can't do that. You have to stay standing, and then just sit down gracefully, wait till the next section begins, and all eyes are on the next person who's begun to stand up, and then you fix your stand down so you're comfortable sitting down reading as opposed to standing up and getting set. You don't do it right away. You've just performed, you sit down. Can't do that. Just do it slowly. You're the person everybody's looking at. Oh, But he did. I mean, he did what I said.
You know, after all these decades, what makes a musician really compelling to you when you hear them?
First of all, they play beautifully. But there's sometimes a way of singers too. Singers and players can play a phrase, and it just has you sitting in your seat like this. It just grabs you, the way they play it and the way they hold the journey that it's on, so that you know it's going somewhere, and you're with them. That can be such a wonderful moment. It isn't always. I mean, sometimes it's very good, but somebody who can really take you on that journey emotionally can be just one of those fabulous moments.
Do you believe that audiences today listen differently than they did earlier in your career?
To what? I didn't hear you.
Do you believe that audiences listen differently compared to earlier in your career?
I don't know. We have to ask the audience. I have no idea.
Thinking of audiences, do you feel like there are pieces that you've written that have kind of taken audiences longer to kind of understand? Is there anything that you've written that you feel like has done that?
Sometimes, I don't know, I can't sort of guarantee that. You know, I write something that's interesting to me, and hopefully it can reach out to the audience. And sometimes I think it's crazy. Well, I have to tell you one thing about one work. I'm a composer who conducts. I'm not a conductor. So I only conduct my own works. But the first time I did that, I thought I'd better have a lesson from somebody just to make sure that I've got all the tricks, you know, and do it. So there was a wonderful French conductor who was, I forget whether he was living or just visiting there, Jacques-Louis Manot. I don't know if any of you know him. You know him. He was wonderful. So I said, Jacques, please give me a lesson. I've got to conduct now, and I want to show. So we went through the score together, and he had the score I was going to conduct. I mean, we didn't have players there. I was just conducting what he saw. He said, "Where's the bassoon? I didn't see the bassoon come in your hand." So you're supposed to do this with bring in the bassoon with a little finger. And so that was incredible. But that night, or shortly after, I had a dream, and I was conducting an orchestra for the first time in my dream. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the piece, everything was going really well. Some of the players stood up and defied me. So I thought, sit down. And then I tried to get I said to the brass, stand up and then shut them up, And anyway, this went on. Well, guess what? The next morning, in the mail, arrived a letter from Birmingham, England. Would you write us an orchestral piece? So guess what? I wrote them something called a Concerto for Orchestra, and halfway through, two of the players stand up to defy the conductor and get one or two others to stand up and defy the conductor as well. And that's how it happened. So sometimes one thing leads to another, which can be a little unexpected.
I'm also curious, this brings to mind this idea of conducting for large-scale orchestras, large ensembles, and then chamber music. What do you find to be kind of some of the greatest differences and things that you enjoy about writing for small ensemble?
Well, it's much more difficult, really, because you really have to know each of the players and the instruments and how they're going to fit in. I just finished a piece which I was asked to write for I thought was a very difficult ensemble for oboe. So guess who was the oboist? Does anybody know Nicholas Daniel here? Yeah, Nick Daniel. And a marimba player, G. High, I forget his surname, and a cellist. Well, that is really a difficult ensemble because the marimba can't match the harmonies of a cello and an oboe, and the cello can do double stops, of course the oboe can't. So where do you get your harmonic language from, and how do you do it? But anyway, I had a great time. I've just finished it. It's just gone off. I just finished the score. I don't do Sibelius. No, don't do no Sibelius for me. I have the full score, I photograph it, and 1 minute later, the score arrives in Edinburgh, where I have my inputter. So this inputter then has to write the score in, I suppose it's Sibelius, and then from that, whatever it is, they can build the scores and transpose. Because I write a score usually in C these days. I didn't used to. You know, a horn and F I write in C, but I remember what the range of the horn is, and I know perfectly well that it's usually a horn in F, even though the horns sometimes play in B flat if they feel like it. And so on. And the clarinets, you never know it's a B flat or an A clarinet, but you know, I write in C, because when you might suddenly change somebody's melody, and then you find, oh my God, I got all the wrong notes if it's transposed. So I do my scores in C. And then, of course, eventually they have to be put in the right key for the conductors. Well, so sometimes the conductors work with scores in C these days. And the players have to know when the conductor's talking what they're talking about and where exactly they're talking, what notes. You know, they're going to say the horn in F, and then they say F, meaning an F was a B flat or whatever, or C, whichever way around. So it's complicated.
You know, I know that there are some musicians here today, and there are many that are tuning in. I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about how that ensemble formed, because it's definitely not a traditional ensemble, the marimba, cello, oboe.
I was asked.
You were asked.
I was asked. I didn't choose it. I wouldn't choose that. And particularly now, knowing what the marimba can actually do, I mean, I would have. It was incredible. But through this, it was through Nicholas Daniel, who, if you ever see him come to, he doesn't play in New York very often because he lives in London, and he goes a lot to California. He plays with a group there a lot, so I don't think he comes to New York, unfortunately, very much. But I've known him for many, many years, and he's asked me to do several things for him. The first thing he asked me to do was a oboe concerto. So I did, and it had its premiere in Kirkwall, up in Scotland, the islands sitting right above, not Shetland, that's too far away, but just on top of Scotland. And it was called Helios. So he came in a bright red dinner jacket to play the premiere. But when it was done here with another player, I said, you know, why don't you put on a red dinner jacket? Oh, can't do that. So
I believe the cellist is the cellist Jeff Ziegler?
yeah.
No, he's on our CMA board, so just a nice little
I
shout
only
out
just
to
met
CMA.
him like 2 days ago, and the piece is finished.
Hi, Jeff.
Yeah.
He's probably watching now. I wanted to move to something centered around the gift that you made to Chamber Music America. It is so remarkable, it is so generous, and it really ensures that your music will live on through future artists and ensembles. And I was curious if you could share what gave you the confidence that an organization like CMA was the right one to help sustain this work. And I know that you did it a lot in collaboration and in counsel with your lovely husband.
It's not that we're that wealthy, but Peter did this. And I tell you this, as I think it's sort of amusing. Way back when we were first married, we bought a little house in Santa Barbara because we lived in Santa Barbara. And then later on, he was running the Virginia Opera for 35 years, but we were still actually living in Santa Barbara. So we bought a small house for $37,000. You know, this was like 53 years ago?
It was in 72.
72, a long time ago. We've been married a long time. So we go by, and then we move to Virginia, but we also then moved from Santa Barbara down to Playa del Rey, which is right by LAX, just north of LAX, and we rented a place there because I thought New York was too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. So we had a little place to come to in California. And so what did we do with the house, the $37,000 house? Well, we saw nearby a very nice house on the lagoon. So we bought that, and we didn't live in it, but we rented it out for like 30 years. So the 37,000 became 1,000,007. And our accountant said, don't just sell it and give the money to charity rather than to the administration, which I thought was quite a good idea. So that's how we had our money. It was the sale of our first little house, which became a lagoon house, and then we got rent for it every year, and so on and so on. So that's how that happened. But we have a very good account. So it was all perfectly legal, you know.
Well, thank you. Along those lines, when you think about legacy in the future, how do you think of it today compared to when you were a young composer?
Well, I just think that I had the great luck, you know, to have some good chances and so on as a composer. BBC Scottish, I'm from Edinburgh. That's how you pronounce it, by the way, not Edinburgh, but Edinburgh. And they gave me a performance with the BBC Scottish. You know, that's what they did for young composers. But what was I going to say? Forget what your question was. I told you I'm very good at senior moments.
I was curious about legacy, how you think about kind of that.
I've lost that one. Sorry. I don't know what he asked.
Okay.
If you remember, you can ask.
I am curious because we've talked a lot about music. When we first met, it wasn't a typical kind of business meeting because all we did was listen to music. We listened to scores, we talked about what we were hearing. Peter was playing performances from Virginia Opera, and we just talked about music. It was so much fun. And I'm curious about this idea of curiosity and artistic curiosity.
Yeah.
How important do you feel like it is as we get older, and how have you kind of maintained that interest and that kind of willingness to be vulnerable and curious?
Well, I think if for an audience, I don't know, I'd have to ask everybody in the audience, but if you go to concerts, then how do you choose which concert you want to go to? What arouses your interest? Are you interested in new music, or you say, oh, I don't know what that stuff, they don't know what they're doing, I only like to go and hear Beethoven symphonies, or, you know, whatever you want to do. And it's up to you and your pleasure to enjoy the music whichever way you want. It's entirely open.
What would you like young musicians and composers to remember, to think about? What are some pieces of advice that you would offer?
What they enjoy doing. How they got their first idea, what do they enjoy doing, how they enjoy working, and so on. For instance, one of the most interesting things was that I wrote a trumpet concerto, which was done in England first. So I decided at one moment that at the end, near the end of the piece, a second trumpet would appear backstage. Now, here the audience. The second trumpet would arrive here, so the conductor's here facing that way, and the trumpet is here facing the audience. And another trumpet would come in and walk down the side here and come on stage. Wouldn't come right to the center, but obviously was a possible future partner, you know, something that might work out very nice. Well, when we came to do that at the Hollywood Bowl, I don't know how many of you have been to the Hollywood Bowl. It's earth all the way up the hill. So it's not exactly the best wood for projecting sound. It sucks it all in. So the orchestra is all on mics. Everything is done on a mic. So I said, how the hell are we going to have an offstage trumpet walk down the hill? And the audience is up a big hill, you know, and then the orchestra is at the bottom of the hill, and there are big drapes where it's photographed so you can see. And so they said, we have wonderful technicians, which is true. So they said to the offstage trumpet, you cannot walk down the hill in Hollywood, on Hollywood Bowl, it's just earth. Nothing will be projected. Nothing will hit something and send it back. So you'll stand stage left, off stage, and our mics will bring you closer and closer and closer, and you stand completely still. And then eventually the second trumpet comes on stage. But the audience thinks that it's been coming from miles away because the way they can organize microphones and do technical things like that, they are brilliant. They are absolutely brilliant. They need to be in the Hollywood Bowl, which is the worst acoustic you could possibly imagine. And yet there's some great things that go on there.
You've written so much orchestral music and operas and chamber music, and it's
You
national.
can't keep me out of mischief.
Yeah, it keeps you out of mischief. It is National Chamber Music Month, and I'm curious from your perspective what you love about writing in the small ensemble form compared to some of these larger forces.
It's just a contrast. You know, if I've written a lot of orchestral music, then I'm probably up for chamber music, or if I haven't written an opera in a while, I find a good story and think, oh, that's what I want to do. You know, and sometimes my operas are chamber operas, not big operas with big forces. I mean, I think I'm the only person in the world who could write about Mary, Queen of Scots. After all, you know, I'm Scottish, so I can say which most English people can't. And I also used to speak French fluently and lived in France. I didn't marry the Dauphin, but I had somebody pretty close, you know. So I'm the only person, I think, who could possibly write about Mary, Queen of Scots. And I wrote it about 50 years ago. And it's just coming up again for performance in San Francisco, which is exciting. It was just done in London, actually. And it was there that I met the young bassoon player that I wrote for, who likes to walk while she's playing. So that's coming up with walking around the orchestra. I'm not sure I'll be able to get to see that, but whatever.
But the bulk of her work, titles, is chamber music. And she's applied the same principles that you've heard her describe of the visual element, of the contact and conflict or flirtation, of musical themes, which she put right back into the chamber music. Thea never wanted children when we got married, so these works are really her children.
And they don't always behave very well.
But chamber music is really the basis of music, I believe, because each instrument has complete responsibility for their part. It's not shared with anyone. And what Thea does is get that responsibility expanded to the visual element in a lot of her chamber music, which is extraordinary. So, I just think chamber music is the essence, because people have to listen to one another, but they have to be skilled and add something special. And that happens much more easily when you have a quartet or a chamber ensemble. And from the beginning, meeting you in Los Angeles, I understood that this was an organization of professional chamber musicians who take that kind of responsibility, and we are happy to leave what we can, as you see the benefit of selling our house, to allow more chamber music to be played and to help support chamber musicians and this group in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so kind, Peter. Thank you, Peter and Thea. What are you listening to these days?
What am I listening to? I don't listen to so much because I lost my hearing. So I have hearing aids. And I used to feel that going to the Met was absolutely no good at all for me because I couldn't hear the violins. It's the upper frequencies. But if I went to the Met at the movies, I could hear much better. Very, very weird. So I went much more to the Met at the movies than the actual live Met. You go into the Met and then the first violins just barely there for me, unfortunately. And of course the first violins are I won't say the most important, but they are very important in most operas. So anyway, thank goodness for hearing aids. They're not perfect, but they're better than nothing. But I do mishear things with sometimes very bad results.
Do you have a desert island album? One album to take with you. What would you take?
I don't know. I know what I wouldn't take.
What would you not take?
No, I'm not going to tell you. That wouldn't be right.
Okay, that's very diplomatic. Well, Thea, I thought it would be nice to open it up to our incredible audience and guests here. If anyone has a question, would like to ask Thea something. Does anyone have any questions?
Silence. Oh, no.
I'm curious, did you experience any difficulty at entering the profession as a woman composer in your career?
Did you have any difficulties as a woman composer entering the field?
Well, in Britain, I had two great friends who were women, and they were my mother's generation, Betty McConkie and Lizzie Lutchens, and whose father was the great architect that so did India, Sir Edwin Lutchens. You know the name, Sir Edwin Lutchens, yeah. So Lizzie and Betty were my friends, and I don't think we ever talked about being a woman composer. We talked about composition and who we'd met and which works we liked and which works we didn't. It's not a question of, oh, but that was by a woman. Never, 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 never. But when I came here, suddenly it was an issue. And I couldn't understand. I mean, we're human beings with, many of the same emotions and the same, have fear, we have joy, have realized in slightly different ways. But, we're human beings. So what's the difference? The trouble is the way we're brought up, the way we're nurtured, as opposed, so I always call the difference between nature and nurture, that during certain centuries, it was almost impossible for a woman to do certain things because it just wasn't done. Not that they couldn't do it, but they just didn't get a chance to do it. And now, in this century, that's all changing. I mean, you look at the thing, you see women conductors, you see women composers, and I think we've finally stopped talking about whether they're women or not, but whether they're good or not. If you're a woman, you jolly well have to learn your technique just like a man does. Just the same thing. Sorry for that outburst. Oh, question in the back row.
Yeah, big fan of yours. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experience at Tanglewood as a fellow with Aaron Copland.
Your experience at Tanglewood as a fellow with Aaron Copland.
Oh, that was so long ago. I hardly remember. I mean, that was like 60 years ago. I went there because it was before we were married, right? Yeah. I went there because Aaron had studied with Nadia Boulanger in Paris, as I had. And so I thought, we'd have a lot in common. And of course, I knew his name. I lived in Britain then. I was living in London. I wasn't yet married. But I thought it'd be fun to go to America. I've never been to America. So I hopped on a plane and came to New York for the first time and spent a couple of nights here, and then went on up to Tanglewood and had a fascinating time with meeting all sorts of people, all sorts of musicians and conductors and other composers and so on. It was wonderful. Had a great time. And particularly being with Copland for those, 6 weeks, I think it is. Yeah, it was great. I recommend it to anybody. Although that was a long time ago when I was there. It's probably just as good now.
Any other questions?
We've silenced them. I don't believe it.
I think there's one more here. Thank you, Jose.
Who are some of the other composers that were in your group with Boulanger?
Other composers that were with you during your time with Boulanger? Other composers that were in your cohort with Boulanger?
Yeah, I met lots of composers. She only taught composers. So I went for my, I was on a class briefly. She had a cours d'accompagnement at the Paris Conservatoire. So I did that for a little while, but basically I just had my lesson with her alone, with her once a week, which was just incredible. I did that for 4 years. So that's why I learned French.
Did you ever have a sort of studio class or a group setting?
She had les mercredis. Her mercredi afternoons were a meeting where she would bring in some of her students who wanted to come. It was entirely free, but also visiting composers, like I don't know that Aaron Copland came because it wasn't in Paris, but she would bring in people to meet and we'd just have a friendly discussion. But there were quite a lot of us. I mean, it was in her sitting room. It wasn't like here, but it was probably almost about the same number of people. So she would do that. So I went to Le Mercredi at her house, as well as my private lesson with her.
Who came?
What?
Do you remember who came?
Who came?
Oh, all sorts of people. I don't remember. Some people that I didn't know, and friends from wherever. Yeah, probably all sorts of people that you would know. I've forgotten. You know, that was, wait a minute. I was 20, so, you know, it was like 60, 70 years ago. Give me a break.
We have time for maybe one more if anyone has any burning questions.
Thank you. Thea, you talked about the bassoonist who loves to play standing up, but you put motion, physical motion, into your performances many years before you met her. What inspired you to have your musicians leave their chairs, to stand, to wander the hall?
He was commenting that even before the piece for the bassoonist, you were having people move around the
Yeah.
stage, and what inspired that?
I think one of the first, I don't remember why I did it, but I think one of the first pieces I did where I started moving people around sort of unusually was my clarinet concerto. It was commissioned by the RPS, Royal Philharmonic Society, and it was for Gervais de Paya, who maybe some of you know or know of, because he used to play in New York. And I don't know what gave me the idea, but often in a concerto, the soloist can have sort of a relationship with different groups in the orchestra. And I suddenly thought, well, it'd be interesting if he actually moved around to stand with them and even take over, not actually conducting, but conducting by the way he played. So his cues became the conductor's beat in one or two moments. And then he would move, so I had him stand by the conductor. You're the orchestra. So here he is facing the audience, and he's here. And then he goes past I forget whether it was second violins or cellos. I think it was second violins in those days. And it is more usually cellos these days. Then he walked there and played with this group up here. And then he moved over there. And I remember I had an accordion come in, and he played with the group with the horns there, and then he came round here and played, and I think a flute player came down to stand there, but the harp was sort of there. So there was different groups that he played with, and he really controlled it by the way he played, the way his musical cues became the conductor's beat. And then the conductor would join in and whatever. So that was fun. I enjoyed that. And I suddenly realized that you could move people around and it could lead to some interesting ideas.
It's like what Peter said, it's kind of chamber music. It's like the basis, that communication.
Well, yeah, and chamber music, you can do that too if you want, you know. I've just finished writing a very strange orchestration. I was asked to do it, I would never have chosen this, but for oboe, cello, and marimba. Very awkward. So I thought, can't really move them around, so cello and marimba are stuck. But I have the oboe standing up or sitting down, but I thought it has to be for a reason. You know, he has to have a reason to stand up. He can't just stand up because he feels like it. So I had to sort of build a drama into the work for him to stand up and then sit down, and then I also had him play the oboe d'amore and the cor anglais, English horn, I suppose I should call it. So he has 3 instruments, all with different tunings. I wrote it in C.
Thea, thank you so much, not only for a lifetime of incredible music, but for your vision and fearlessness and generosity.
Very nice to meet you and to meet the group that you have put together. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll take a quick break.
anything?
Dialogue, but I'm
Exactly.
That got established.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. And for those of you who just joined us, welcome. I'm Susan Dadian. I'm the Director of Artistic Planning here at Chamber Music America, and I know many of you from many, many years. And it's a real honor and pleasure to be with all of you today. So thank you all again. I just want to acknowledge a few people that are here today. You met Orchid McCrae, Adriana Vergara, you met Jose Feliciano, all of our, and here we are, and Jared. Where's Jared Cavazos? We have a number of CMA staff, and I hope you all get to know everybody here today. And then also Kevin Kwan Loucks, who is the CEO of Chamber Music America. Many of you who are longtime members of Chamber Music America maybe don't know Kevin. And anyway, it's a new CMA, and it's a really bright and really wonderful place now. I just want to say thank you to everybody who has made all of this possible, including BMI, who is, oh, I'm sorry, there's Larry Blumenfeld. We're going to pass the baton to you later, our wonderful editor of our magazine. So anyway, and this panel has been supported, sponsored by BMI. And where are our BMI friends again? Okay, there's Scott. And, oh yes, hello again, and where's Deirdre? Where are you, Deirdre? Anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody who is here today. You know, when we put together this, I put together this event, we first of all, we wanted to involve composers. Composers and composition are very much at the base of who we are as musicians. And how many of you, did you all enjoy hearing Thea Musgrave just now? Wow, wasn't she? It was just amazing. I mean, I've performed her works. So anyway, it's just a real honor to meet the person who's behind the notes. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The people behind the notes, who write the notes. And so putting together, okay, speaking about who is the source of inspiration, I turn to our Buddha. I refer to him as a Buddha, right, Marcos? George Lewis. Okay, so I went to his book, A Power Stronger Than Itself, and I said, I need to have something that is, what is really going to unify this, and we have unity that we're going to be talking about later. And I found a beautiful quote from Famadou Danmoye, who was one of the founders of the AACM in Chicago. And I'm going to just read it. There have been moments of defiance throughout the history of music, but the strength of the effort and the strength of cooperation between musicians and their unity of effort is what enables us to survive. And we are not surviving here, we are thriving. We have got great composers here on the stage here with me today. All have been commissioned by Chamber Music America through our various programs. And so chamber music is all about cooperation, collaboration, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And without composers, what would we say? The last time I wrote anything was a Walter Piston exercise. So I can't say that I am a composer, and I am awe-inspired by what all of you do. And we have a number of composers here in the room today, so thank you so much. So, okay, thank you. So all four of you have been commissioned through our programs, and I just want to pose some general questions, and then I would like us to have sort of a free, open dialogue, because really that is what chamber music is. It's a dialogue between musicians. So our classical commissioning program started in 1984. I've been running it since 2002. And then our New Works program, which started in 2000, and that's through the generosity of the Duke Foundation. And then we have the Artistic Projects program, and we have commissioned through that as well. And that began in 2022. So really what is so essential to Chamber Music America, of course, we have chamber music performers, but we have chamber music creators. And so I want to ask some general questions of each of you and just respond how you would like. And then we're going to open it up for an open dialogue. So, first of all, how do you work? Transaction? I don't know. Maybe. Or do you workshop, input, edit, revise? I'm looking at you, Katie, because I know you're a master reviser. And so, anyway, I mean that in the most complimentary way. And then, how do you work with musicians who are coming to you? And of course, we also have a violist here on stage. So, first of all, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce, I'm introducing everybody else. We have Marcos Balter, and you all have a program today. Catherine Balch. Marcos is at Columbia University. Catherine is at Yale. And then we have Jessica Meyer, who is both a player and a composer, a violist, I'm sorry. And we have Billy Childs, who is our former president of Chamber Music America, of our board, who has received funding in both our new works and our classical commissioning. So we span very different languages here at Chamber Music America, and I'm really glad to have people of such, such prominence here with us today, and we want to hear from you. We heard something very special earlier, and now this is the next generation. And what are we all taking forward? We talked about legacy, and so we are all creating a legacy here, including Chamber Music America. We're going to be turning 50 next year. So anyway, and at the heart of what we do is collaboration. So Marcos, tell me. Okay. How do you find, or who finds you? What is that whole process in terms of working with ensembles? You have been commissioned through our commissioning program for a saxophone quartet, with Anubis Quartet, and then most recently with the Shanghai Quartet and countertenor Anthony Roth-Costanzo. Interesting, very different works, very different circumstances. How did it all come about? And then tell us what made each of these special to you, and then we'll talk about your work in general now, too.
Well, firstly, good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure being here. Susan, I'm such a fan of you and everything that CMA does. It's really one of the most important organizations for composers working on this sort of weird, experimental, and exploratory music that we do. There are a few places that we can count with the kind of support that we get from you. So thank you, and such a pleasure being here also with amazing colleagues that I respect very much. So I was just 2 weeks ago at Stanford, and I presented on my music, and then they organized this event for composers that, the whole thing was framed on like, let's ask Marcos about how to have a career, which I always find like a very weird thing to talk about, because honestly, there is no such thing as a path or as a formula to develop a career. I really think that the best thing that someone can do, composer or otherwise, any kind of artist, is to find your own path according to who you are and what is important to you. And that's highly individualized. There are some tenets perhaps, but the overall idea is that you will succeed at being the best you that you can be. So I think that what becomes then the thing to do, at least for me, is to figure out what feels good in your body. And I, looking back at my career and looking at what people usually say about building a career, building some kind of path, I did it all wrong. I absolutely did the opposite of what a lot of people have been advised on doing. I've never sent my music out to an ensemble unsolicitedly. I've never tried to engage at a party that I was not directly invited. Call me vampire. But, I feel like if you engage with people on a humane level, if you have conversations that go beyond career, that if you just, show interest in humanity, humanity shows interest in you. So most of the connections that I've made were at a human level. It's like, well, I've talked to this guy, he seems interesting, I'm intrigued. I've heard that he writes some music. Let's see what that is. And then on top of that, I've also very quickly realized that the best kind of partnerships that you can establish are partnerships that are also not entirely transactional. With people that you break bread with, people that you understand on a human level. And when you do that, you write differently, you think differently about the process of creation, because you're not writing for flute, you're writing for that flutist that is your friend. And you also free yourself from the idea of thinking of the act of creating as being this sort of universal language that one just then becomes prolific at. When I was in school, the whole thing was, you gotta write something that someone and it was always Japan, someone in Japan can open the score and just play it, without, having to think of how to do it. And I always really rejected that idea, and I'm glad that I did, because that actually is against history. History of music making, chamber music making, has a lot to do with performance history, right? And performance history is very much a mother of necessity. There is this thing that this piece of music does, that someone figures out how to do it, and then they transmit that to other people. It's not about reproducing what works, but sharing knowledge on how to challenge or surpass specific challenges, which then encourages all of us to take risks rather than writing some kind of a codice on how to write music. So if that's a long answer to what you're asking, but I would say, if the question is how do I go about, composing music, with great curiosity about the music itself and about the people who make it.
Thank you so much. And how do you critically assess who you're writing for? You've already said about the humanity, but then also, earlier Thea Musgrave was talking about, we've got marimba, we've got cello, we've got oboe, and wow, what am I going to do with this combination? And so how do you critically assess what's going to work for that particular ensemble and to lift your music off the page?
Well, sometimes you don't, and sometimes you gotta try things out, and sometimes you try things out that don't work, and you write some terrible things, and that's okay as well, because I do think that is part of the game, writing bad music. I always tell my students that you should never look at a canon of someone. Beethoven wrote some horrible things that don't exist anymore for a reason, and so did Mozart, and so did Bach. Lots of things came from, lots of really awful music came from genius' hands. And understanding that, understanding the humanity of the act of creation, and understanding that what we understand as someone's catalog is already a curation of that catalog, and even how we understand history, that is a curation of the creators that were around a specific time, and not the totality of who was creating what, is really, really understood. So also say, I don't know if things will work when I jump into a project, and sometimes they don't, but I try my best, and I embrace the risk.
Oh, thank you. And it is a risk. It's sort of like venture capital. You just don't know. So, right?
You're asking for money for this, which is
I know,
crazy,
really,
right?
that's right, yeah. Katie, I want to move on to you now, too. So I know that you are sitting next to somebody you studied with, Marcos. And and now you are mentoring another generation. So, just tell us, how was it studying with Marcos?
Well, the Marcos homunculus is very strong in my head, because everything he's saying, I'm like, yes, exactly, I agree completely, what Marcos said. So, I think I just would second everything he said. Studying with Marcos was amazing, in part because of his constant reminder to take risks. And also because of his sort of nourishing listening abilities, I felt like whenever I brought my music to Marcos, even if it was, handwritten and kind of messy on like lots of pages, we'd spread them out on the table and he'd sort of sit through and sort of audiate. And I always felt he got right to the heart of what I was trying to do. And that kind of generosity of listening is, I think, part of a lot to do with what he's saying about collaboration, about seeking out humanity. The sort of process of creation starts with an act of, I think, receiving and listening. And I think Marcos is a great model for that.
Wow, thank you. And are you now carrying that on to your students at Yale? No. Yeah.
No, I mean, of course. I mean, it's a huge privilege to get to teach really, really talented, bright, curious people. It's incredibly dialectic and fruitful, I think, for both sides, hopefully.
That's beautiful.
If I may say so, if you ask me today, nowadays, who is the best composition teacher in the United States, it's Katie Bausch. The students are consistently genius.
That's great. We commissioned you through our classical commissioning program for Beethoven. And so that was kind of one of those odd kind of combinations. And, so I know that you worked with them and then you revised it. So, when you work with somebody like that, or any ensemble, they are really a vehicle for the artistry that you are putting forth. And I know that you workshopped with them just about how you work in general in terms of working with ensembles, because really it's the integrity of your music. It's really, talk about risk. You don't even know if they're going to play it well. And so, I mean, there's a lot of risk that goes around. So how do you work with an ensemble then to again, lift your thoughts and your artistry off the page, literally?
Well, I think, like Marcos said, I'm not so much when I write thinking about my thoughts and my artistry. I'm sort of thinking about the community and network of people I'm influenced by, of people I'm sharing the music with. And so my thoughts and my artistry are part of a sort of huge, vast network of ideas and inspirations and resources and collaborative opportunities. And so usually I'm thinking about the people I'm writing for a lot more than I'm, thinking about myself in some ways. But with Beethoven, because it is a small trio, because it's kind of, that instrumentation is double bass, piano, and percussion. So it's kind of a jazz-influenced trio, which is really fun to play with. I write a lot for the double bass, so I was really excited to write really soloistically for this intimate group. And we tried out a lot of things. Sort of often what I'm trying to do with different instruments is find ways in which they can sort of create a kind of ecosystem of sonic objects with each other. So, if the percussionist is making a certain type of sound, does that sound exist in some way on the double bass? Is there an offspring or a reaction that happens in another instrument from that sound? So thinking of those instruments, the three of them, as in a kind of ecosystem together, and how do they behave? How do they reproduce? How do they flourish in that ecosystem?
Oh, that's great. That is so great. And what you're saying is so chamber music mindset. Really, it's about community, it's about dialogue, and it's about sharing, which that's great. Thank you. And speaking of sharing, so we're going to get back now, Jessica. Jessica has written in two of our programs, classical commissioning for the Argus Quartet, and as a viola player, you have a really good handle on string writing, of course. And then you also wrote for Exponential Ensemble, and that was part of a partnership with a school, and that was through our Artistic Projects program. If you could just talk a little bit about how you work with the kids, and because it's really fascinating what you did with the kids, and then tell us your story about that.
Oh, sure. So before having this life as a composer in the past 10 years, my previous life was, and still very much a violist, but I was a teaching artist for Lincoln Center and a lot of other organizations that would get kids ready for concerts. So I spent a lot of time in K-12 classrooms teaching, but also teaching teachers how to be better teachers, and anybody coming out of the Carnegie programs like Ensemble Connect, I would train those musicians that came out of conservatories how to do that. So when this grant came up about how can I write music in collaboration with a school, I'm like, oh, I do that. And it was the Exponential Ensemble that wrote me the email. It's like, we need a school, and also you do this. And I'm like, yes. And I also know exactly the right teacher, and Celia Cruz High School in the Bronx, who would be perfect. Their kids would be great. And so when we're talking about collaborations, I'm always looking at the ensemble as far as so as far as string quartets, I've written for Argus and St. Lawrence and the Public, all very different and all very different pieces. And when I got to write with these kids, I was like, okay, it's similar in the way of like, well, what makes them them? When I'm working with an ensemble, and then with these kids, what it was is that we decided that we were going to write on a theme of the four elements, water, fire, air, earth, and I just went into the school and got them improvising, got them on their instruments, getting used to making up sounds to represent different things, so that by the time when the ensemble came in, luckily, every member of that particular ensemble were also teaching artists who knew how to collaborate with kids, get their ideas, and get them on their instruments. And so that was a very unique compositional process, but that I've done before, where getting kids to come up with ideas, I would record them all, and then go home and notate them all, and then figure out how to daisy chain them all together, or tease them out, and then at the end hand them a score that said, okay, well, this is David's idea, but I did this with it, and then I paired it with this one. So it was a very unique experience, but it was really wonderful to see CMA jumping into that kind of community engagement, because New York is just filled with schools that are not always really well served with the arts unless there's a beautiful institution or a collaboration or a funder that is willing to make things happen. So it was really nice to sort of put that hat back on and my composer hat and do that kind of project.
That is so great. And so the next person to my left is Billy Childs. And Billy has been commissioned through our New Works program in 2006. And it was called Man Chasing the Horizon. Oh man, and that was such a cool piece. It was for piano, guitar, harp, saxophones, flutes, bass, drums, strings, somewhat Euro, somewhat jazz, somewhat everything, and very Billy.
Yeah.
And so,
can't get around that.
I can't get around that. And then we also commissioned for the Dorian Wind Quintet a work called Ecosystems, and Billy wrote that. Jessica's husband is the clarinetist in the Dorian Wind Quintet. Small world. And so anyway, these works are very different. They're very Billy. Mm-hmm. And what's your whole process of working? So you work for your group, but then you've written for other groups. Right. So they're very different kind of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I always try to start out with is, why am I writing something? What is the story? Because I think music, any kind of art is about humans telling stories to other humans about the human experience. So in the case of the Man Chasing the Horizon, that was a Stephen Crane poem that he wrote. He wrote these little short haiku-type poems that I always found really cool. And this one was about futility, And whenever I see a horizon, I think of motion, because I think of how vast it is and how fast you would have to go to travel it. And so that song that I wrote has a lot of motion in it. So yeah, that was the inspiration for that. And then Ecosystems was wind quintet. Whenever I think of woodwinds, I think of like nature. I think, it's wood, a lot of it. So I think of trees, I think of forests and stuff like that. So Ecosystems dealt with like the environment, different ecosystems, the coral reef, the forest, and then speaking of elements, it was like water with the coral reefs and earth with the forest. And I was thinking of the sky. So I wrote the other one, and it's not really an ecosystem, but it was like Aurora Borealis inspired, So it's a lot of different, the main point I'm making is that I try to tell a story, and there's a lot of different ways that I do that, arrive at that.
That's right. It's interesting that you say Aurora Borealis, and I'm sorry, I'm the historian here at Chamber Music America. Mm-hmm. Our very first year of our classical commissioning program, there was for the Borealis Wind Quintet. A wind quintet was written by NEA jazz master Bob Brookmeyer in the first year of our program.
Oh, cool.
So
I would love to hear that.
Oh yeah, and so that I'm saying that because we have been very open since day one.
Yeah.
It hasn't just been like second Viennese school,
right,
or something like that. I'm looking at our academic friends here. No.
Well, when I came on the board, it was like there was this huge move toward jazz, recognizing jazz as a chamber music, and so. A thing that I've always wanted to do was like find commonality between a jazz combo, for lack of a better word, which is essentially a chamber group, in that it's conductorless, it's one person to a part, and try to make a hybrid form, which is not not a new concept, but try to make it work in the way that I saw that it could work. That's
so great. And if I may just indulge, I would like we should all congratulate Billy on being a Pulitzer Prize finalist of most recent.
Wow.
And it's for, that is.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, really? Oh my God. Gorgeous work that you wrote for
my mom.
For your mom, yeah.
In the Arms of the Beloved. That piece was it was kind of like a hybrid of different orchestrations and different genres. So it was a piece that I wrote. I was inspired by, there's a great, fantastic composer, Morton Lauridsen, who's a dear friend of mine, and he wrote Lux Aeterna in memory of his mom. And I was inspired to write a choral piece about my mother, who I'd been thinking about a lot prior to writing the piece. She had passed away in 2001, and I thought I wanted it to be a requiem, but I didn't want it to be very heavy and, have a heaviness to it. So I found a poem by Rumi, which I thought was beautiful, as interpreted by another poet, Jonathan Starr, who kind of modernized it. And it's, the theme, there are many references to birds in flight, and to me that meant like the soul is leaving the body and flying into wherever you think it flies into. But the main thing was the motion of birds as the soul. So I wrote a piece with solo violin acting as a voice of my mother, and I was on the piano acting as my voice, and then my jazz chamber group, which is like a string quartet, the Lyris Quartet, bass, drums, guitar, and harp, and a full chorus with Luciana Souza singing also. So it's this kind of like amalgam of different styles, which, worked out, I guess, and it was really rewarding to do. So I was very humbled and appreciative of the Pulitzer nod.
Oh, absolutely. And you also had a chorale.
A chorale, yeah, the
like-
chorus, yeah.
Yeah, the chorus.
Yeah, the LA Master Chorale. Yeah,
That's right.
they're, one of the best in the world. They're incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what a beautiful remembrance.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, for such a special person in your life.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, so let's just kind of open it. I want to have all of you talk to each other too. And, because this is, you're composers. How often do you composers do you all know each other? I mean, you two know each other.
I think we met before here, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Have we met before?
I don't think so, but I know your music.
Yeah.
So I do
thank
feel like
you.
I know you a little bit.
Oh, thank you. And you and I met your husband.
Yeah,
This is our
And
first.
I've heard you in the other room without
Really?
you being there, as far as my husband playing your music.
Oh, you heard me? Oh, okay. I hope it wasn't too much of a burden.
So anyway, okay, just some questions, just some general questions. What inspires you? Like you were talking about Rumi, and then you were talking about the kids, working with, public schools who need this. How about anybody, what is your general inspiration? Is there some poetry or some art?
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah, it kind of depends.
It just hits you?
Yes, I can go to a museum and get inspiration, or I can have a conversation with Katie and be inspired on something that Katie will say. I think it's just having your antennas, up.
Yeah.
And being receptive is really, really important. Though, I would say one great place to gather inspiration is academia. So I want to go back to the idea of academia real quick here.
Okay.
How many of you have a degree here, in anything? So we are in a room of academics. That is the reality of it. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that academia is not a bad thing,
Yes.
especially nowadays when intellectualism is being directly attacked by so many sources in life. And academia is different than what we think of. Like when it comes to composition, I understand the boogeyman, idea behind it. But I teach with George Lewis. I teach with people who, are as fluid as I am, stylistically speaking. And if anything, I would say that if there is a place nowadays that you can live away from thinking commercially, from thinking about money, and from engaging with different ways of thinking without necessarily attaching yourself to this sort of neoliberal ideas of what aesthetic is academia. So I just wanted to say that real quick, because it's important to not fall for these anti-academic ways of thinking nowadays. It's a dangerous time to attack academia.
Thank you. And that was not an attack that I made before, but you are really, we all came from. Exactly.
Well, I agree. I'm sorry to jump
and
in.
then Katie, yes.
But, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I agree. If the politics are left out of it, and you're just focusing on the learning. I remember being at USC and the energy. I liked being, sometimes I'll write in the library or something because I like being around the energy of seeking knowledge. It's like kind of an infectious energy that inspires you. This is very inspires you to be more creative and to speak more and to seek knowledge and try to expand your mind. Anyway, that's all I want to say.
Yeah, thank you. And Katie, why don't you chime in, please?
Oh, I was just going to say that, one way, at least sort of my colleagues and I at Yale try to pedagogically think about inspiration is through our peers, through peer learning and through each other. And where I teach every week, we have a seminar where all of our composition cohort and all of the faculty, so me, David Lang, Aaron Kernis, and Chris Theofanidis, sit in a room together, and most of that seminar time is devoted to talking about their work and listening to their music as a community. And it's in that sort of peer learning environment where I think inspiration can sort of be fertilized, can be nourished. And you know, the composers and artists and musicians that you're friends with, or that you study with, or that you learn with, those people really stay the same throughout long and meandering sometimes careers. And so I think, like Marcos was saying, school is a place where those relationships can begin, and they continue to grow. And that's certainly a critical part of the institutions where we teach at.
Thank you for that. Yeah, both of you.
If I can jump in.
Yes, chime in, please.
After composing so much and after playing a lot of different music on viola, I found myself viola faculty at MSM, and with a very particular charge of training violists in the same repertoire that I was trained in, which is it's like it's Bach, Brahms, Walton, Bartok, Hindemith. Like, that's my job. In addition to a lot of other rep I can cram in there, but there's a canon, and then, as far as what inspires me as a composer, I realize I'm trying to get all of my students like, well, let's look at the Walton Concerto. It was this 20-year-old living in this house by the shore that someone gave him to write this piece, and he's lovesick for the girl downstairs. Like, that's why it sounds like this, you know? And it's like, can we just tap into what make composers write? Like, you know, we're out, we're living, we're in love with things, we're in love with people, we have our friends, we have places that we visit, and things that we think about. And that changes throughout the lives. And when you get a chance to also look at, you know, people of the canon, like, where were they when they wrote those things? And if you, in filing back, especially like later Beethoven, and like what, you know, it's so I think that in that sense of curiosity, we're all just living in that land, and to be blessed with jobs where in the moment we can tap into something, wow, this really resonates with me, and this is, let's talk to this group and see how we can make this happen.
And if I may, what I think is really interesting is that there is this preoccupation of like people finding their own voice. So whenever I speak with like a young composer and they're like, oh, I'm trying to find my own voice, I'm like, your voice has found you. And whenever I think of style, whenever I'm like discussing style, I always, you probably heard me saying that 1,000 times, that style is a consequence, never a cause. Style is something that you can only really intelligently talk about looking back, looking at what you did, but should not be something in your head as you're looking ahead, because that is so limiting. It's like really choosing to exist within a specific box rather than existing experimentally. And I think that like looking back, like the beauty of history is that it's the only time that you can non-artificially talk about style. But talking about style in current times, I find extremely artificial and perhaps not that productive.
Wow, okay. That's a very interesting thing. So how do you approach then style? You have a Billy style. Yes, you all have a style. Some of your individual styles.
Yeah, I mean, I essentially agree with that. I mean, you know, music, I mean, whatever it goes back to the story you're trying to tell. The story has no style. The story is what it is. You're sad about something, or you're writing from a standpoint of you want to talk about your feelings, or you want to describe the exterior world like Impressionists do, or you want to tell a programmatic story in a sequence of events. Whatever it is, that's fixed. So then if you want to write in a jazz style or a European classical style or Baroque style or this style or that style, that should come only in service of the story that you're trying to tell. I mean, the story, like me, I see kind of like shapes. You know, like I mean, this is getting a little abstract or new agey or whatever, but I see shapes. You know, I always, when I hear a Ravel thing or something, and I hear a certain orchestration, it looks a certain way to me. So I actually start with something, what something looks like, you know, in my own head, you know, and then whatever technique, whatever, whether it's highly contrapuntal or very homophonic or very stationary or a lot of movement, depends on what I think is effective in describing what I'm seeing in my head.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, totally.
It absolutely does. I mean, I'm only speaking English because I am assuming that most people here don't speak Portuguese. So it's just choosing your language,
I love that
and
language,
using,
though.
yeah.
That's great. How about you, Jessica? What makes your style you? And what's molded you? I know you've said Walton, you've got all that, probably played the Hindemith and everything, but then you found your own, and yeah.
I mean, I started my new music group, Counter Induction, in 1999, where we played music by so many composers, and so I developed the whole language of color and sound of everything composers were asking me to do. But also, in and around New York, I've played jazz, rock, bluegrass. I mean, any kind of music you can think of, I've played it. And so when I started to write my own music, I've wound up doing lots of different types of styles. And to the point where if someone only knows the piece I wrote for the Public Quartet, which is just so hard, thrashy, rocky, groovy, and then I write what I wrote for the Argus Quartet is like so completely different. And I think when we talk about style, it gets very dangerous, when people expect a certain thing from you. And I'm like, no, I'm writing for the group, A. B, like what sound world's inspiring me at the time. And I might draw upon a rhythmic feel. I might draw upon a certain kind of color palette, depending on what the piece is.
Oh, that's great.
So it really... Yeah, everything just so depends.
Yeah.
And
working with people that you find can really champion your work. It really there's an integrity there, and there's an expectation. There's not like it's like, oh well, this group wants me to write something. Well, maybe another time or something. I don't know if you've ever approached by that. If anybody that you're like. It's very nice of you, but thank you. But then there's also the integrity piece. I think that, you have integrity to the groups that you're writing for, and they have an integrity to the work that you have written, and to really make it come alive for an audience. And really, it's about the audience. So what do you think about audience? Do you think about audience at all when you're writing? Or is it... Just curious, Katie, what are you thinking about in terms of audience?
I do think about audience a lot, mostly in the term of, or in the sort of, the kind of space the piece will be in. Writing for a space like, is it still called Dave and Geffen Hall? Okay. Anyways, writing for the New York Phil in that space, right? I am writing, a music that pulls from sort of the network and history and context of that space in various ways, versus writing for, a sort of more intimate setting that might be in sort of underground concert spaces or less sort of institutionally sort of branded spaces, I guess, then of course that context and that space influences the music I write. I think it's, I don't know if, Marcos, you want to talk about this because you're more eloquent than me, but for me there is a sort of conversation or a dialectic that's unfolding when I write for certain spaces that can sometimes be, on the one hand, a sort of an accommodation to that space, and on the other hand, a sort of gentle push or challenge of that space. And I think a lot about that balance. I think that balance is also in pedagogy, the sort of like invitation, but also the gentle push. And so I think that certainly is a part of the composition process, is thinking through some of those ideas, like at different levels of consciousness, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
I think that we talked about risk but we didn't talk about the other side of risk that is as important, which is trust, right? That people
Thank
have
you.
to trust you on taking that risk with you, and there are more trusting spaces than others. You know, I think it's, again, I think my favorite kind of environment to work in is an environment of great trust. So, you know, some institutions are more trusting than others, and I think that in big places, and that's why my heart belongs to chamber music, in bigger places, it is hard to put that trust when you have so much money invested that you cannot lose money, that you have to recuperate that capital. And again, knowing where you're having those conversations and with whom is really important. You were talking about kids. I love kids because kids can get weird and they're not even gonna think about it, right? If you wanna write like your weirdest work, write for 5-year-olds and they're gonna love it. You know, their parents may hate it, but they'll be like right there with you. They'll be like, this is magical.
There's a lot of goodwill working with kids. It's amazing. It's a very high trust environment.
Because we learn
I like
how
that.
to hate.
Yeah.
And they haven't yet.
But also, I think what's really great is that, I mean, when I was at Juilliard, there was like the canon, and then there was this new music ensemble, and they were very siloed off the time. And now I think more major like conservatories and their teachers are really trying to like integrate everyone together and make it a requirement that, like, I know at MSM they do that. Like, you need to, on every jury, there is a new music, you know, by living composers on it, you know, which is great, you know. And I think so. It's evolving over time into how to. It's that it's not a thing that it's like, oh, I have to do this. It's like, no, I want to do this. And how many students right now who are just, I mean, a lot of them like come to me, and different people like me who are like just asking for permission to be a composer, and I'm like, go. Like, just start putting it down, start writing it down, and it's great in this time to get people excited, and it's easier to do it.
Right, thank you. And speaking of trust, it's really, I love that you brought that up, Marcos, because we trust that when we have a commission that goes out into the world from CMA, we trust in you. And then we trust in the ensemble to play it well. There's a lot of trust involved. Thank you for that. Spot on. So, yeah, you have some...
Yeah, some thoughts about the audience. I look at us being kind of the same. It's like a transference of energy, of experience. My aim is always to give the audience an experience, you know, like to have the audience come and listen to what I'm doing or what composition of mine is doing on stage, and to get something to be able to have them think or feel in ways that they hadn't expected, that the ways that could only have been started by what's happening on stage. And you know, as a jazz musician, I have a visceral experience with that, you know, because when you're playing in the live moment and the people are with you, there's nothing like, there's an exchange, a transference of energy that is circular, and it's, and imagine as a chamber musician or even as an orchestral musician, it's the same thing when the audience is with you. There's a real, like, give and take. There's a real humanity being shared, like we're in it together, and you don't feel different from the audience. You don't feel separate. It's like a dance that happens where you're dancing with a partner when it's really, you know, you'll be playing a jazz solo and someone yells because they have to in the middle of your solo, like, yeah, or whatever. You know, there's nothing like that. That's really...
And there's no need to actually like ever hold back, right, or to be condescending. I think that trust is something that the audience also feels. Like very recently, I went to 3 of the shows of Sariaho's Innocence at the Metropolitan, which Lucy Shelton just rocked it. You know, amazing show stealer. my hero. But it is, if you think of what the Met offers, it's a hard opera in every single sense, from the subject to the music. But it was done with such sincerity because Kaya was that genius. It was just so heartfelt that I went and I was surrounded by non-musicians, and everybody was sobbing at the end. Everybody was like right there with the story. And I feel like that kind of sincerity is the product of the trust of the artist, which then is so contagious that elicits a trust from the audience that responds back. Kaya didn't know what the Met audience was, who is, sitting there in that thing. It's much more about the spirit that one puts into it without thinking of catering, but really thinking of giving, and giving as honestly as it gets that kind of response back.
Wow, thank you. Okay, I'm looking at we have another panel that's coming in 5 minutes. Do we have a quick 1-minute question? Anybody? I'm sorry, I lost, this was so engaging, I lost track of time, sorry. Anybody? No. Okay, I think that you've answered a lot of questions.
We covered a lot of ground.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed hearing what all of these amazing composers have. Thank you. And so anyway, I just want to say thank you to each of you for being here today, and we're now going to be doing a little transition to our next panel, and I'm looking at our next panelists, and we have Maria Schneider and Larry Blumenfeld, who is going to be coming up here in 5 minutes. So let's just take a little break, and we'll see you in 5. Thank you so much.
Okay, gotta turn me up. Good afternoon, good afternoon. Yeah, we have more. I'm Larry Blumenfeld. I am editorial director at Chamber Music America, which means a lot. Part of what I do is put out 4 times a year Chamber Music Magazine, which, well, it's interesting because some people will read about Kronos Quartet in Chamber Music Magazine. Some people will read about the World Saxophone Quartet in Chamber Music Magazine, and they may think they're disparate worlds, but then if they read on, they may find out that Kronos Quartet decades ago commissioned Julius Hemphill of the World Saxophone Quartet to write a piece for them. So, this is called In Search of Unity, and one of the things I think we're focusing on is the things that bring us together and the things that enable us to transcend the things that might keep us from coming together. And I find that, when I'm not doing this stuff, for the past 22 years I've written about music for the Wall Street Journal, so I have the luxury of talking to people like Maria Schneider, to people like the composers that were on stage before about the worlds they inhabit and what is inhabited in their music. But I find that the arts, and especially the performing arts, are the most disarming in terms of bringing us together. And then there's that even more rarefied air of those of us who like talking about this stuff, which we're doing, which gets really deep. So first of all, I want to just acknowledge Chamber Music America and the Wallace Foundation for enabling us to be this, come together. And when I think about unity, I think about that other word that contains the word unity, community, which is what yeah, it's kind of cool, right? It's in there. Which is, what we all foster, maybe even without setting out to do it. So I will say that, without embarrassing her too much, I am old enough to remember when, I guess 34 years ago, Maria Schneider created the Maria Schneider Jazz Orchestra and began down a path of a very distinctive compositional language, writing specifically for, it was something that was spoken before, for individuals. I remember along the way, you being designated as a National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Master, honorary doctorates from the University of Minnesota and the Eastman School of Music, and 14 Grammy nominations and 7 Grammy Awards, but it's not just the numbers, it's the breadth here. Honored by the Grammy Awards in jazz, in classical music, and for your work with some guy named David Bowie. And so, you know, there's a lot of, talk about building community that way. So before we start to talk and you say things right here in real time, I'm going to throw back something beautiful that you said that's on the NEA website. In this increasingly polarized world of social tensions, the antidote to everything that's gone haywire may be found in jazz, our nation's own extraordinary art form that has at its heart listening, presence, communication, collaboration, and self-expression, which I thought was, a very beautiful way to get to why we're here today. So many roads we can go down and will, but I guess in essence, your instrument is a community, right?
Yeah, the band, and what I've come to feel, and I can talk a little bit about this, that in many ways jazz has never become more relevant than it is now because of it being a listening art. Nobody listens to each other anymore. Everybody just pontificates or screams, and we've allowed ourselves to be in these echo chambers where we just hear back what we want to hear or what's designed to make us angry so that we keep bouncing back with our anger. And what I've learned over the years from my band, I started this band and I enjoyed writing for improvisers, but I never really knew how kind of profound it would become, because what I started to experience, we had 5 years, Scott Robinson is here, and we've been making music since 1988, I think it maybe started. Oh my God, and he's so amazing. And he's amongst the people that taught me about listening and trust. Because over the years, I didn't have that much music. We were playing at Visioni's a lot of the same pieces night to night. And they had these, solo sections, and everybody would press to do different things. And sometimes they would really take it big distances, and I could see, and I started to learn about and experience the trust. Sometimes them going distances that I was like, oh my God, how are we going to bring it back? It's a great challenge in a way to write music for improvisers, and there's a balance there that I've been trying to figure out for years, because I remember one time I did a clinic talking like this, and Bob Brookmeyer, who had been my teacher, was sitting in the back of the room, and at a certain point he raised his hand and he said, so do you feel, that was on my first record, Evanescence, do you feel that solo on Greenpeace is successful? And I was like, oh, and the way he said it, it's just like, and I wrote that piece when I was a student of his. It's like, find time to talk about this now. And he said he felt that I lost control of the piece. I gave too much control to the improviser, and that I lost the composer's hand, okay? And I thought about it, and it was true. Many times when we would play that solo section, especially Scott, I'm talking about the first solo section in Greenpeace, sometimes it feels like when I bring in the band, it's like getting the hook, I can't really figure out how to make that point feel inevitable. And so for years then, I started writing compositionally more harmonic, like, okay, here's the path you're gonna go. It's not quite so open. pieces like hang gliding, you know, where the solo follows this trajectory.
Oh, this is exactly where I was hoping to go with you. Like, what is this process?
Oh,
and it is, you know, I think across the fields of music, there sometimes can be this idea that there's composition and there's improvisation, and they're either separate worlds or they're opposed.
No, you have to really. So here's the thing where the listening comes in and everything that I wanted to explain is, so then we started doing this gig at the Jazz Standard. And on the weekends, we'd do the third set. And on the third set, I'd pull out some of the older pieces that were super open. And they started taking these extraordinary risks. But the thing that was different is the band had existed for a long time. They all compositionally really knew where those pieces had to go. So they, with their own, you know, sensibility, understood the inevitability of what had to happen. And the art of listening within the band became so high that the level of listening to each other and also listening in the context of the music to make this inevitability happen, but that the music was a living system different from night to night. It was like, oh my God, I love this. So I went back to writing more open sections again, because I was like, okay, it's a different band, it's a different time, you know. Sometimes I wish Bob could come now, and he'd be like, okay, because now it's the idea of unity. I don't know, it's like, it's a band of like murmurations of starlings sometimes, you know. And sometimes there's risks. There's been times, and I would say to a drummer like Clarence Penn, I'd say, look, you know, if you guys get into something, when the written stuff comes in, make my music accommodate what you're doing. Do not suddenly change from my music, because I don't want it to suddenly feel like we went from this flow to like, oh, now we've got the straitjacket on. So sometimes they'd get into a groove, and the band is getting ready to come in, and Clarence would look at me while he's playing like, you sure? You sure? You wait till you hear this, you know. And every once in a while it wouldn't work, and I'd be like, okay, maybe we stepped a little far. But it's finding it together, trust, development, and they have become so much a part of what I compose. There is no way I would compose, like I was just telling Marcos about the piece I wrote, Sputnik, for Scott Robinson. I would have never written that piece if not for Scott.
Right.
I would never give somebody else that much space on my music if it wasn't Scott Robinson doing it.
Right.
That's so spectacular.
Which is, you know, Duke Ellington could say the same thing about how he was working with his orchestra. It's not just writing a piece of music, and even it's about an idea, because your music so often carries ideas about some subjects that you can talk about that have to do with nature or politics, but you're at a certain level interested in what Scott thinks about that idea, right? Like,
Sure, yeah, and just where they take the music. And the hardest part is when you're writing these things and you don't know what they're going to do, like trying to plan for a sense of inevitability. I mean, for me, music is so important. It's art and time. So you have to grab somebody's attention, entice them, shock them, you know, coax them, something, and then you have to keep them there. And if it's too much, you don't want constant, just like the kind of inevitability that, oh, this is all, I know it's going to happen. You want surprise, but you want inevitable surprise, and you want this thing. And how do you do that when you're building in this improvisational thing? It is so hard. When you're first learning to write for jazz ensembles, usually, you know, people are writing kind of theme and variations, tune, and people are blowing on the tune, and so students, they get to the solo and they're like, whew, 2 minutes, you know, write a few backgrounds, you know, that. But for me, the improvised sections are the ones I sweat the most. Like, what can happen? I don't know. And Scott knows it takes time for us to find it together, too. I remember Arbiters of Evolution. You were, like, ready to kill me, you know? But I kept trusting. I knew it was there. what we wanted that solo section to feel like, and now it's just magical every time, you know?
You know, it's funny, the last panel they were talking about ecosystems, and I think you started down a road of, here's an ecosystem of venues that are no longer here, Visiones, Jazz Standard, but it did make me think about, you know, you could rehearse this music with your orchestra, but to a certain extent, all the things you're talking about happen the most in performance, right?
Oh, you're so right. And Billy, is Billy still here? Where's Billy? Billy, when Billy was talking about audience, this is something I was going to say. I always, if I remember it, I got to get that put in my rider. Then I don't always have to remember that the lighting, I want the lights partially up in the audience. There's nothing worse than playing to a black wall and not getting that. And I know the band plays so much better when they can feel the audience. Like, I remember in college, I had a teacher who talked about the audience-performer relationship, and I remember thinking, yawn, you know, oh my God, yeah, right, this is so theoretical, you know? And now I'm like, oh my God, absolutely, 100%, so important.
Yeah, so to a certain extent, those audience members, especially in clubs, are like collaborators. They're co-creators in this, aren't they?
Sure, and even if you're talking to them and you see their faces, you know, even just speaking to them and telling them about the music, and then the soloist, I don't know, Scott, do you feel that when you're playing and you feel like you're playing to them? Not that you're, everybody look at Scott. Look at Scott there. He's special. He is so special. He is.
See, even here you're giving him space in the composition.
Yeah. Sometimes I hand him the mic because he says things much funnier than anybody ever would.
Well, no, I mean, even like I remember years and years ago talking to the great Cuban bassist Cachao, and who had his own great jazz orchestra, and I was asking about the percussionist, and he's like, well, no, it's the sound of the shuffling of the feet of the people who are dancing, and that's what's gonna, you know.
Oh, wow.
And
nice.
So I know, well, I mean, it's also, hey, for those out there who fund these activities, the life of this music and the organism like your orchestra needs a steady supply of audience and venue and presentation. That is not just like, that's the life of the form, right? Now, you were talking about, I know your project American Crow, you really got very explicit in talking about using jazz to illustrate this art of listening.
Yeah, because so many times when the band is playing and it's some section where it's improvised, and I hear them listening, and I mean, sometimes it's just startling, and I'm going to come back to Scott because he's here now, but also because he's so central to what I do. But sometimes when he and Gary are playing together, their ears are so amazing and where they can go. And then Jay Anderson will come in, and then I'm listening to, and you see the whole band, if we're performing, you see the whole band just like looking and smiling, and the audience knows something's happening that never happened because, and I see that, and I know that the things that it takes to get there are, first of all, everybody with their intelligence and their wisdom that they've, you know, gotten on their own, but it's going into the performance situation empty and saying, this can go anywhere, and listening to each other and saying, oh, I'll go with you, and everybody, and I started, I don't know, I guess when things started to get really crazy politically, which it has been, honestly, for a long time probably, but I started looking at them and thinking, wow, imagine if our elected leaders would watch this and listen to this and take it to Washington, D.C. when they talk with each other and be like, wow, I don't have to go in and just be this braggadocious, hideous thing, convincing everybody I'm right. What if I listen? Right. And maybe, you know, come up with something that actually gives something to my constituents because we find something better than I would have found on my own. You know, it was that, so I thought, I want to write a piece about this called American crow, because we're crowing and crows caw, but they're also very family-oriented, so.
Which begins with the horns cawing, right?
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Very
That
much
was,
so.
I did a cluster, and somebody in my band helped me. I had them try all different mutes. I got on the phone. I'm like, okay, put on that mute. Just go caw, caw. Finally, it was the solo tone mute in a cluster with them going caw, and that sounds kind of like crows.
But yeah, no, I'm glad you spent a little bit of time explaining that idea, because there is this political aspect or value to that idea of listening. It's not just an aesthetic. And, I feel it too in my work. It's, over decades of writing, whether it's criticism or stories, it's very hard to hold people's attention in a way where they're open to receive things that they didn't already respect. I mean, one thing I love about Chamber Music Magazine is I get lots of space to get people to talk to each other and go down. Often it's musicians who maybe don't even work together, to go down roads that you might not expect. But that's really where you're going to diffuse things. I remember I was once writing a piece for the Village Voice. This is during a different period of crisis between Palestinians and Israelis. And there was an Israeli-Palestinian orchestra, and one of the musicians said to me, "We're going to reach you in a place where CNN and Fox can't get to." And I was like, yeah, okay. And I really do believe that happens. Now, I don't know if this is something you can answer, but if this was a room full of undergraduates or even younger students, is there something you would tell those students about how to foster or develop this art of listening? Is there a way to?
I don't know. I think. I mean, if they were improvisers, I would have them start by playing with each other and looking at each other, so that they're seeing each other. Right. But I think the bigger issue for, like, if I'm teaching, is more getting them to listen and trust themselves. Marcos was kind of talking about this. And, that this idea of them trusting that the most unique, David Bowie said to me, there's no most unique. Unique is unique. He used to get bugged if I say it's very highly unique. He
And
said,
your
no,
editor
it's
would
not
say
highly
that
unique.
too.
Unique is already as unique as it gets. So I was like, okay. What was I saying? So you took me on a tangent there.
I think you were saying that the idea of trusting yourself first and foremost.
Yeah, that the only thing we can do better that nobody else can do is ourselves. What we ourselves would do. And Brookmeyer was somebody who helped me with that. Because when I first came out of college, now I'm talking to Marcos here. When I first came out of college, I felt frustrated that my music could be just about anybody's, and I went to Bob, and I just, I just want to find my voice. And, he didn't probably have much to say about that. But what he did have to say is when he first looked at my music, he said, "Why is there a solo there?" I said, well, it's a jazz thing for a big band. It was going to be for Mel Lewis's band, and, this part happened, and now it's a solo. He said, solo should only happen if the only thing that can happen is a solo. I was nodding like, yeah, okay, yeah, and I'm like, I have no idea what the hell that means, but I'm gonna pretend I do because you're very intimidating. And then he said, by the way, why is the bass player playing on those chord changes? Oh, those are the chord changes of the piece? He said, yeah, but you could have pitch material, you could have. Slowly over time, what I started to realize is there's infinite choices for every aspect of the music. Right. And in the jazz world, for so long, it was, people write tunes, everybody solos on the tune. It's a little like a prefab house. I mean, look, there's endless, fantastic, genius tunes to be written, but there's 1,000 other choices. It doesn't have to be this, Orlando, a house in a house, what do you call it, development where you get to choose if there's a gable and a different door, but it can be anything, it doesn't have to be right angles, everything. And then the more you start choosing, oh yeah, I want this and I want that, and the enthusiasm starts to boil, you become you, and you don't ask that question anymore. One day you just don't even, it's like, you don't think about that. Who am I? It's like style. I don't know. I quit thinking about it.
It's so funny, that story. It must be 30 some odd years ago. I was interviewing the great singer Cassandra Wilson, and she was involved in a very large scale Wynton Marsalis project. And Wynton Marsalis is a musician I love, but she told me about, she said, hey, why would I be singing this here? And why would this person be soloing here? And yeah, the question didn't fall well for Wynton in that moment. But she was questioning, well, but it does, you get, and this is something that I've seen in talking to so many musicians and composers, that, yeah, one way to get past those conventions, those, prefab things, or just rudiments, is what's your intention here? Like, what is actually your intention in this bar or in this passage or in this piece, as opposed to, I know I have to have Yeah,
to put the voice away that's over your heads, because so many times, you're right, can I do that? It's like, you can do anything. It's like making it work. A lot of times what I say to students now, because I'm so into just being outside, birds and plants and everything, and I try to get them to understand that the music development and motivic development and all these requirements of what good music is supposedly, it's really, if you think about nature, it's all there. Everything in nature has patterns. One of my favorite things to contemplate is the Fibonacci series. In every pine cone, every flower, if you count the opposite spirals, there are always 2 consecutive Fibonacci numbers. That is such a mind blow. And it turns out it's like nature's best way to compact the seeds into a space, but it's consistent. And that existed millennia or whatever before we ever evolved, and we evolved as part of this. And so I try to get them to see that we're part of that patterning. So if you come up with something, an idea, the most spontaneous idea that you like, if you put a magnifying glass on it and you say, I love that idea, there's always math and geometry and patterns inside of it. And if you say, okay, let me find those things, now build on that so that this thing becomes this organic, it's kind of like all oak trees come from the same DNA, but everyone manifests in a different way. So how now are you going to make that thing kind of manifest, and trying to get students to find themselves through their trusting the very nature of their enthusiasm, literally, I don't know, listening to themselves.
Right, and trusting, not so much thinking about what am I supposed to be doing now. Because I don't think you want a jazz orchestra filled with musicians thinking, what am I supposed to do here? You want them.
Definitely, and I think one thing that happens for young people now, they've got so much music available to them. Right. I ask students, do you guys ever feel just overwhelmed, like there's so much music on Spotify or whatever, and you're just overwhelmed and you feel like you need to know it all? And they're like, yes. And I said, let me tell you, you don't. I had this many record albums, and I listened to them again and again and again and again. And I said, it's much better. And they write pieces that have so much stuff in them. And I think that's part of it, because they're absorbing so many things on a surface level and not diving into the depth of one thing that they love and understanding that that actually just has a very simple basis from which that thing came. Do you run into that, Marcos, teaching? Yeah. Is Katie still here? Yeah. But yeah, it's a thing. What was that? Say that out loud. Yeah.
Well, actually, and the topic you're touching on now, I thought you dealt with so magnificently in one of my favorite projects of yours, Data Lords, which, I mean, I know you were, with that project, you were trying to address many, many things about what the digital world has thrown us into. But
can I say something, though?
yeah.
I wasn't trying to address anything. It's kind of like, I feel like music is kind of like a Ouija board.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wrote a bunch of music, but the music was, what was coming out was I was completely freaked out about reaching this moment of singularity and data, the data lords becoming so powerful they turn on us and destroy us. Hello, I wrote that in 2014.
Right.
Should have listened to me, right? I mean, look at where we are with AI. I mean, who thought it would? I think in the liner notes I said 2030 or something, but it's like, oh my God.
But do you mean that? Do you mean literally that those ideas came through the music that just flowed out of you?
Yeah, because I was dealing with all this stuff with copyright and everything. Right. And then I wrote a piece called Don't Be Evil, mocking Google. Right. But then I wrote a piece, we went to Japan about, going through a Japanese garden. And then I was like, I can never record this music. It's so disparate, and we did a gig one night, and this man, Justin Freed, who's one of my Artist Share participants, he said, you got to record this music. And I said, Justin, it doesn't fit together. I don't know. And then that night I was in bed and I was thinking, wait a minute, this music's showing something to me about my life. This needs to be a double album. One is how we're being just inundated by big data and all the things that it's doing to us. And the other side is when you pull away and you reconnect to humanity, to nature, to art, to, silence, birds, and so then that's how that came. But it was sort of through me analyzing what I did. It was not a plan, and I don't plan anything. But I trust a lot that it's going to mean something in the end, and if it doesn't, well, whatever, but that's kind of how I operate. I'm not a planner.
Well, you mentioned Artist Share, and, when we're talking about this, the complexities and challenges and even alienation of digital life and where we all end up right now via the technology that is in everything we do. Another version of building community was, okay, way ahead of the curve, more than 20 years ago, you were the launching artist for Artist Share. And can you describe what that is and what it really meant at that moment?
Yeah, at about the year 2000, I'd been with a record company in Germany. In the year 2000, this friend of mine who knew I was struggling with record company issues a little bit, and then of course Napster was happening, and he called me one day and he said, "What's the one thing nobody can file share?" I'm like, God, I don't know. And he said, "The creative process." I'm like, oh God, okay, tell me what you're thinking. And he says, I'm thinking of starting this web thing, and what you would do is you would announce you're gonna make a recording project, and people could come on board in advance and pay for it and fund it, and then you document the process, and we called it fan funding. Crowdfunding did not exist. Kickstarter started 9 years later. Right. YouTube didn't exist. And he came over one day and we went over the numbers, taking out the middleman of the distributor, the record store, the record company, where you're making like a tiny fraction of net after they recoupment. Anyway, if I showed you the mathematics of how record company recoupment worked, you just wouldn't even believe it. And so then we started looking at the numbers where all of a sudden I'm going to make like 85% of gross. And I was like, holy crap, I could sell way less records and make way more money and fund these projects. So I said, I'm going to do this. And I did Concert in the Garden that way, and I've done every single record that way, and commissions that way.
And Concert in the Garden was the first internet-only, crowd-funded recording to win a Grammy Award.
Yeah, that was funny because
that was funny.
When you win a Grammy, you know, then you go backstage and there's these rooms of journalists. I'm sure you've been sitting in those rooms.
Not me.
Okay, well, they give you a Grammy.
I avoid that.
Okay, they give you a Grammy, and then you stand there, and they're all waiting for, like, Beyonce. So you come out, and they say, Maria Schneider, Best Large Jazz Ensemble. Wah, wah. You know, so nobody asks any questions. So you're just like, now you went from feeling on top of the world to the biggest loser. So then you go to the next room, and I'm like, okay, one more room of humiliation before I can try to pretend I actually arrived. And so I went to the second room, and there was a man, and he said, I'm from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and, you know, people back home, you must feel pretty proud. And I said, well, I'm particularly excited. I said, because this is the first record that ever won a Grammy that was only sold on the internet. And he said, are you sure about that? And I said, well, you can fact check it, but yeah. You know, that came out in Russia, in Argentina. I was on CNN. Right. It was a big deal, because I took my records out of the record store and won a Grammy. The music they didn't care about.
And it really did. It really, right. But no, I mean, it maybe, you know, what 15 minutes ago we were talking much more deeply about aesthetics and performance, and that is, it's a little more interesting in some ways. But you know, like we were talking about the AACM before, and in Chicago in 1965, and with those musicians gathered around a table, they were talking about an aesthetic idea. They were driven by an aesthetic ideal, but they were also driven by a practical reality of, you know, the business that surrounds our creative life is not serving our creativity. And, you know, I think, I know for a fact that you established, you know, first of all, saw in advance what was coming, but established a model for people, because, you know, at that time, a musician coming up in jazz thought, I must get signed to a label, and that label must make me successful. And that's not the world we live in now.
I have to show you this, because this is just an example. I brought it in case it would come up, and I'm making it come up. So the thing I love about it is I can do whatever I want. I run my own show. I do my own thing. This is sort of what I love about my band too. It's my thing. If I want to revise something 25 times and pay for another rehearsal, yes, it might annoy everybody, but I do pay them, not very well, but well enough. Well, not. Is it well enough, Scott? What did he say? What did he say? What did he say?
This is your chance.
I missed it. Whatever. You can. Anyway, this latest project I did, you know, it was out of belief about this American Crow thing, the listening, you know? And so I went completely bonkers on this package. I mean, the back, it's hand sewn, it's letterpress printing. I commissioned this artwork for $10,000 from a fantastic artist I love, because I wanted to make something that people would put up and make them think about themselves, you know? And so it's so wonderful, not with a record company that I have to convince somebody that this is important or something. If I take a loss, it's my loss. You know, it's so, anyway, that's why I love it. It's complete freedom. I run my own show. I like that.
And one thing about the artist share process, which it took me a while to really grasp it, but then I started to realize what you created there was something where you did foster this community of people who were active participants in the creative process, active participants in the life of the artistry, and not just buying product and merch.
You know what's crazy is I've been documenting things through interviews with the musicians, when we made records, and commissions, me talking about the process of writing, and sometimes I'm completely stuck, and I don't know where this piece is gonna go, and oh God, I might have to pull out of this commission, and then, then you find that all this stuff is documented. I have an archive going back to 2003 of musicians that are no longer living. It's an unbelievable, I just said, because he knows Brian Camilio, Brian, I want to make sure I have all that stuff on a hard drive to give to somebody someday, because it's a tremendous, nobody has an archive about creative process, what they learn in producing record from, I have an interview, it's me sitting down talking with David Baker, the engineer. I mean, it's priceless. David Frost, the classical producer, just wonderful, wonderful things. And yeah, and a great community of people that support the music. And, here's the thing about it. Early on what Brian said is, we won't put your music in Tower Records. I'm like, what do you mean that's where I sell all my records? He said they're all anonymous sales.
Right.
It's not, he said, you want to know every person who buys your music. People listen to your music on Spotify. It's like, you can have 1 million people on Spotify. You're not making much money. And
right.
It's like, and do you know that 90% of the music on 10% of the music on Spotify is generating 99% of the plays.
Yeah.
So 90% of the music is splitting 1% of the financial pie, and most of those people are funding their own recordings.
Now, I hope you don't mind that we're in this subject now, because it is, it's intimately connected. I mean,
well, it's crazy.
It's intimately connected to the art that we love, which is why, even I started out acknowledging the organizations that made this possible, because, if we're in a situation where we have to foster our own holistic communities. I mean, the truth is, even if the numbers were different, the people and the companies that are bringing not your music, but in most cases, music to consumers, and the people and companies that are bringing my writing to readers are no longer really selling music or publications. They're in the data business.
Well, and now they're making deals with AI.
And they're calling things content. But now that same passion and clarity that you were speaking about this a moment ago, you brought to a congressional subcommittee, right? In terms of issues of intellectual property, internet, digital rights. This is an open field of advocacy, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, so when I spoke to Congress about it and sitting next to YouTube, the problem, the thing that I fought YouTube with a class action lawsuit and Google and Alphabet was that they have content ID that was basically designed for piracy, that fingerprinting technology. They turned it on its ear to say, oh, you can put your music in there, it recognizes that it was put up, you can get some of the ad revenue. But they didn't allow people like us to use it to protect our music. Only the big record companies or big artists got it for that use. And I knew that, because we couldn't protect ourselves, that the balance is going to tip. And now it tipped. They have all that music. Now the AI is starting with it. And now everybody's just, hoping they get a bunch of views. What? For your ego? It's not really. I mean, for some artists like Emmett Cohen, for instance, people like that, it's worked really well.
Right.
But if you're a chamber music group, you're a string quartet, and you've commissioned somebody to write music for you, and you put it on YouTube, and even if you get 10,000 views, which would be pretty exceptional probably for something like that, you're not making any money, and now you can't sell the recording because it's there for free. So why would anybody buy it? So that, I can go on forever.
Yeah, and I mean, for all that, there is an element of gloom and doom to some of that, but the other side is the reality that we were talking about and that the panel before us were talking about, that nothing will ever stand in the way of the humanity of this and the human-to-human connection and the processes that you were talking about. I mean, we just have to keep being more ingenious.
My question and my concern is where this is going for young people. Mm-hmm. We know as composers that the writing process, I don't know, they all made it sound pretty easy on the last panel. But I know for me, it's really hard, it's arduous sometimes sitting there, and there are those moments of self-doubt, a lot of them for me anyway. So I don't want to include the other people in this, but I think writing sometimes can just be really hard. And I worry about this next generation that has these tools. When they get to that, they just say, okay, let me see, maybe I can spin a little something at AI. Oh, that's a good idea, I'll start with that. Just jump-starting things, and not because wouldn't we all agree here who compose that it's composing over time, it's a process of learning about yourself and creativity and others and humanity and what makes us human, and what's going to happen when it's just too easy to not face the struggle of that anymore. That's what I worry. That's because, yes, there is this thing of music and humanity, but when that next generation, when it's too easy to make their muscle weak with this thing, what is going to happen? It's a question. I
have that same fear about writers and writing.
Absolutely.
But I do think that, I don't know, I feel like those young people you're talking about, whether they're musicians, whether they're composers, whether they're just going to be listeners, if they're put in enough situations of hearing live music in real time and having the kind of experiences that you were talking about, that Billy Childs was talking about, that protects us from the lure of the convenience. Because I think that's the thing that you will never get. And for me, I know when I work with writers as an editor, when I'm a writer working with editors, that process is what anyone who's really writing or really reading wants. And that's what I think everything we're talking about that is terribly dangerous and terribly convenient, it can't touch that. It can't touch what you and Scott have.
Well, I agree. Like improvisation, it's like giving somebody a blue book test in college. They're in front of the audience, they can't use AI. But that process, and what I worry about is at a young age, they fool with it, and then it's like, it's a crutch that they can't undo. I don't know if you guys run into it in the classical world, but in the jazz writing world, getting these students to write separately from the notation software is really, really difficult. And they're so uncomfortable because they've started out that way. So it's like training somebody to have an entirely new embouchure, You have to really want it to, turn something around that you've done for years. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. Yeah. Oh, I want to be more positive.
So being more positive, can I take you back to those 30-some-odd years ago when in the same moment in time, I guess, you were working with Gil Evans and Bob Brookmeyer, two, Mount Rushmore figures of what we might call big band or large ensemble jazz writing and arranging. Knowing that you went on your own road, what do you think you absorbed from them back then that changed where you ultimately went?
Well, first of all, what was interesting, because I was studying with Bob and working for Gil, and they were both quite intimidated by one another. That was amazing to me, to hear Gil talk about Bob and his intellect and his this and that, and to hear Bob talk about Gil's, magical, whatever, it was pretty amazing. And I don't know what I carry. I know how they inspired me. Gil, I don't think I would have ever written for big band without the two of them. Gil showed that the world of jazz and ensemble jazz writing can be so transparent and delicate and just make you just go, just breathless with just beauty and sound, that it isn't primary colors of, like Basie or Thad Jones, which are awesome on their own right in different ways, but it was this palette of just depth of emotion and color and texture and beauty and waiting. And the lines, the simple lines that always draw you ahead, even at just a deathly slow tempo, And then Bob, it was like Picasso breaking apart form, because everybody else were like, when I heard, the Make Me Smile album and My Funny Valentine, where he just deconstructed a song and made a new composition out of it. And it's like, oh my gosh. I wasn't thinking at the time, not everything has to be theme and variations. But it was kind of that. It's like, oh my God, this is such sophisticated composition. And it made me, and then I saw Toshiko perform. Toshiko Akiyoshi. At Orchestra Hall in Minneapolis. And she came with her band from LA and conducting and playing, and the music had some kind of her Japanese kind of perspectives, and then lots of woodwind writing and everything. And it was happening in a classical concert hall. And I was like, you can do this? And it was like, it felt elevated, and then I said to this guy I knew, thank God he answered what he did, because I was so impressionable, I said, do you think I could do that? And he said, why not? And he could have easily said, in your dreams, And I probably would have been like, yeah, you're right, But anyway, yeah, those three things were just huge. And then when I was with them and working with them, like Bob invited me to write something for Mel Lewis, but say, I have an idea for a book for you. By the way, I gave this idea to Martin Johnson. He hasn't run with it yet. So if he doesn't, so my idea.
Martin's a good friend of mine.
And Mel Lewis makes me think of it. So you can ask Martin, if he's not going to do it, jump on it. So, because Mel kept playing this piece, Green Piece, too slow. And so I said to him, Mel, or he played it too slow. I said, Mel, it's about here. And he said, why don't you just start your own damn band? And so my idea for a book, because then I did. So my idea for a book is called Tough Love, because this newest generation of students cannot take criticism. And you know what? So many of us were mentored by people that gave some kind of tough love. And I think that those stories should be told for this generation to understand that it can be humorous and it can be motivating and it can be, wonderful. So I think you should collect stories. Christian has a great one about James Brown. Tough love stories.
So I can go broke and make enemies at the same time? Is that? I had the luxury of...
Do it through ArtistShare.
I had the luxury of working at the Blue Note Jazz Club for a couple of years, which was an amazing experience, terrible job. But I could be there watching how people worked with their bands during the day. And yeah, I don't think anyone was harsher than Betty Carter to her musicians, but if you look at the musicians that came out of Betty Carter's bands and what they will say about her, that was tough love of a very, very deep dimension.
When I was a kid at Eastman, and Wynton Marsalis came, and he was just a kid too, and he was playing with Art Blakey. And he told a story about how he played a ballad, and then Art Blakey said, "That's Wynton Marsalis who doesn't know the lyrics to that song." You know, that's tough love, but it's good. You know, and Wynton told it in a way like, yeah. You know, he took it in a way that was like, yeah. Not in a way like, oh my God, I gotta call Mom, and you know, she's gotta call him, and then they're gonna tell him he's gonna lose his tenure, you know, or whatever.
No, you're talking to the father of a 17-year-old, so this is a very deep subject that we're touching on right now. So now, we've talked a lot about community and participation. So I'm wondering if any one of you has a question for Maria Schneider to improvise within this construct that we've created here.
What do you put down on paper?
When you write open sections?
Yeah.
It varies. I mean, I have some open sections that are a lot of people playing, but they're kind of open and they're not barred, you know, it's kind of spatially notated. And in those sections, I'll give everybody a mini score of the whole band so that they can see what each other's playing. So if they have an event that needs to come in, they know, oh, I'm after that. You know, it's like, you know, I'm thinking CQ, or Concert in the Garden, or Pretty Road, different pieces like that. Other solo sections, sometimes it says, like on Greenpeace, the one Bob didn't think I gave enough information, it did say a Phrygian, a anything. So maybe, yeah, maybe that was a little too open, and just it's open. But a lot of times there's a lot of talking too, a little bit about it over time, and I don't know, Scott, like Sputnik. As we were working on that, you know, I gave him a kind of a mini score of what the band is playing, so he can see it. And then we discussed it. I started to hear that, oh, Scott, when they're high, you go low. When they're low, you go high. So that was kind of sort of the only thing. And maybe if I was, maybe on the published version, there should be a recommendation there. Good idea to go high when the band goes low. Just so you're out of their sonic space, you know, but there's, what's that? Oh, yeah.
Michelle.
Anybody else?
Do we have time for one more? Ah, okay. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, this is Miggy. Hi. So I write for big band music too, and we know it takes a lot of time. And in this situation all over the planet, I was interested how you actually put yourself together while you are in this long process to finish your writing, and the world is becoming, it looks like it's not becoming better. And it's, I don't know how to say this, but the work of writing is never quick. It takes time, and we have to build up little by little, while this world is changing in a really bad way. So, and my question is about how you take care of yourself while you're writing, and you don't know where this piece you're writing right now it's going to go.
Are you talking about the insecurity of not knowing where this piece is going to go, or more existential, like where the hell is everything going?
It's like the balance. My point is that the balance between these two things, that while you're writing, so I always feel like I wish I don't wish 100%, but I wish that the writing can be a little quicker in the meaning of like to bring something better to the world. But it takes time, so I was wondering how, and you are so conscious about a lot of things and the issues we have in the world, so
oh gosh, you know what?
Yeah.
Even the things about the world, I don't usually set out to write music about things and try to change the world. It's more more often I just come up with some idea and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's this, you know? And then I use that to kind of develop things. I can tell you two things that I love, two things that have changed my life as a writer. Okay, I'm gonna pull one out so you can see, lest you not believe how much I love it. See this book and all these bookmarks?
Yeah.
That's how much I love this book. To me, this is the greatest book on music ever written. It's called The Art Spirit by Robert Henry. It's about art, it's not about music.
Oh, I see.
But it's phenomenal, you know? And one of the things he says in here is that an artist, that the most important thing the artist can do is to get into that state, kind of that state, and that's another thing. It's hard for people these days because the phone is always there, but turning everything off and being in that state where you go to that kind of expansive place. And he said, when you're in that state, that the encounter you make, then your art becomes imbued with traces of that state. I can give you a quote because actually I'm using it in a speech I have to make and I was working on it. The quote I love is, he talks about that his students should make paintings that don't look like a painting. To transcend simply making a painting, he describes the necessary state of being the artist must embody while working, suggesting that great art transmits traces of that state. He saw that state as a portal to something greater and described the arts as, and this is just a minute. I love this line. He described the arts as signposts to that greater knowledge. And I think that the best we can do is to be in that state and be receptive to, I think that thing is truth, you know? And, you know, the brain, they've done scans of the brain. The part that lights up when we see something beautiful is the same if you see something beautiful, if you hear something beautiful, or you look at a mathematicians look at what they call an elegant mathematical equation that has economy, but opens a world with the fewest ideas, which I think great music does too. You know, when you hear a song, you just say, it can't be any other way. That is just perfect, you know, and to me, that's the trace. And that's the trace of truth, and that's why we do what we do. And whatever's happening in the world, we can't control it. But that thing we can grab and put into our art and make our art embody that thing. And that's all we can do. I mean, that's my best shot at doing something that matters and is meaningful, because you can't really predict what's meaningful and I'm going to write this piece and this piece is going to make change. I don't know if that's the way to make a piece to make change, you know? But to want change and to love and to go to that place and write, maybe that piece will make change. I'm not sure. Everybody might have a different answer for that, and I don't know if that's what you asked even.
See, this is what happens when two composers get to talking. And actually, that was such a beautiful, thank you for sharing that book, and that was such a beautiful note to end on. And I think that we'll have a forum where people can have more casual conversations. I actually really do believe that you can change this world one composition at a time, one improvisation at a time, one conversation at a time, and I hope that these conversations today ripple out into your lives when you walk out of here. Please, I want to thank again Chamber Music America and the Wallace Foundation, but most of all, please help me thank Maria Schneider for being so generous.